Hey, welcome back, music lovers. Matt and Cheryl's Gen Excellent playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Cheryl.
And joining us for our final episode of the music of 1978, Cheryl's husband, Mike. Mike is going to offer up the final song that we will add to our playlist for 1978. And all three of us will pick our favorite albums of the year as well, as we say farewell to a year that, going in, Cheryl, I thought was maybe the worst year for music of the 70s, but you got very enthusiastic early on about 1978, and I'm discovering there's a lot more treasure in this year than I was expecting.
Yeah, I remember like months ago when we kind of first started this, you made that claim about 1978 being like the worst year, and I was like, what? And the album pick of mine was one of the first things I mentioned that had come out this year. So yeah, I did feel like I had a sense that, no, there's some really great music, but you've definitely come along with 78 for
Yes.
sure.
Well, and I will say your album pick would probably be my choice for best album of 1978 as well, but we're not allowing duplicates. We all have to have something unique to bring to the table. And I've got an album that meant a whole lot to me as a younger person, and then I hadn't revisited for a long time, and I still like it just as much, if not more. Mike is going to chime in too and throw us a little curveball, I guess. We were expecting something else from Mike, but I'm kind of glad he changed his mind because it'll add a little variety to our album picks. When we're doing these years, I'm kind of looking back and getting a feel for what was happening culturally and in the news in these years as well. And one thing I noticed about 1978, big year for serial killers. I remember as a kid hearing about the Hillside Strangler, and I don't know that I was aware of the whole Son of Sam thing. That had happened the year before.
Yeah.
He ends up getting convicted in 78. But Ted Bundy, obviously anybody who grew up in the Northwest, no matter how old you were aware of that name for sure, because he had connections. I think he's from Tacoma originally, went to school at the University of Washington. He actually escaped prison and went out and did some more killing on the other side of the country in 1978 and got recaptured. So that was kind of a lot of the news in 1978. Kind of bleak stuff.
Yeah, kind of sets the tone for the year, huh?
Yeah. The economy was still struggling. We're still in the middle of an energy crisis. Jimmy Carter was president, of course. You had the whole Love Canal thing in New York with the neighborhood built on a toxic waste dump. And then, of course, the next year was, well, I don't know if it would be considered the worst environmental disaster in United States history, but certainly one that got us worried about nuclear power plants. So we'll talk more about it in 79. But yeah, just a lot of good news coming out of 1978, certainly in the USA.
But a lot of good music.
Yes. And a lot of the hard times, I think, fed into the swell of underground music that was starting to bubble up in 1978 with the, punk rock coming around in 76, starting to mutate and add other influences. The poppier side of things we would tend to refer to as new wave. The harder, harsher side of things tend to get referred to as post-punk. And I think you saw really the first landmark post-punk albums coming out in 1970, although I would consider Television's Marquee Moon maybe to be the first post-punk. It's not a punk album.
It's not a punk album.
No.
And I think as 79 comes along, post-punk is really in full force that year.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that will be certainly reflected in a lot of our choices for 1979. And part of the reason I was down on 78, I was really looking ahead to 79, thinking this is going to be the year that really sink my teeth into it. Because I kind of think of, as we end 78, for me personally, it's closing the first chapter of our journey, because we've been looking at earliest musical memories starting in 72, now completing 78. By 1979, I'd started listening to music on FM radio for the first time, had my station, and started buying music for the first time. So went from just kind of being exposed to music courtesy of those around me, family, to seeking out my own music.
Yeah. And that kind of started with me around then too. I was a little bit later, but yeah, I mean, it definitely does shift at that point. But actually, I feel like most of the things I'm choosing now and will for 79 and probably going into maybe about 81 or 82 are things that I discovered later, not that I was into at the time.
Yeah.
Mike, on the other hand, was an old man already in 1978. So
Mike was already a teenager in 78 and certainly had formed his own musical tastes and opinions by that point. And I'm curious, Mike, to get your perspective on the album that you have chosen, which is one that was just a seismic event in rock music in America. It's influenced countless electric guitarists for sure, and probably got a lot more people listening to harder edge music than they had in the past. And that would be the first Van Halen album. Now, I don't know about you, Cheryl, but in 78, me personally, 8 years old, 9 years old, whatever I was, would have been pretty unaware of that album at the time. I think I caught on to Van Halen with their second album because they had a top 40 hit, Dance the Night Away, which I really liked. I remember hearing it on the radio.
Yeah, I wasn't super aware of that album, but I do remember that I had friends whose older brothers had that album. And so it was somewhat a little bit on my radar in that sense.
Yeah, in 78, I was in 8th grade, and even that, in middle school, people had Van Halen and knew about Van Halen, and certainly older brothers and older sisters also. And it was everyone. It was the jocks. It was the stoners. It was the nerds. Everyone loved Van Halen. And it wasn't just the music. It wasn't just the guitars. It wasn't just David Lee Roth jumping up and kicking, and, which was cool also. A lot of people identified with it because it really is just a group of friends were playing music for a long time and made an album. It seemed like they were more approachable, that they could be the guys next door.
Yeah, you pretty much had someone in your high school that looked like each of them.
Yes. And acted kind of like each of them.
I know we had our David Lee Roth in my high school. He was a senior when I was a freshman.
Yeah. And we had an Eddie Van Halen for sure.
Yeah, I think, certainly after that, every year there was at least one or two Eddie Van Halens. Not just the look, but the guitar and everything. And the logo, everyone was writing the logo on their peaches.
Oh, yeah. Every dude was drawing it on his peachy, for sure.
Just the name. I mean, it's Eddie and Alex's last name, but it just sounds so cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it harkens to Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
Hadn't thought about that, but yeah.
But I was considering The Cars, because that
also
is
a perfect
great
album.
a great debut album. But really, in the end, I knew about The Cars, but in my neck of the woods, it wasn't that big. But Van Halen, everyone knew Van Halen, and it was just so cool. And it was the album of the year.
Well, you had Eddie Van Halen, who comes out of nowhere, and the seismic impact of when track 2 rolls around on that LP after Running with the Devil fades out.
Yes.
It had to be like, 1967 when Jimi Hendrix shows up in England and all these great guitarists are like, oh my God,
what just happened?
This guy? Yeah. What is he doing?
Yes.
We just hadn't heard stuff like that. Now, nothing he did was necessarily original. I mean, he was copying some tricks from other people, but just his mix of musicality and technical flash and creativity. And the sound on that album, Ted Templeman, the producer, Don Landy, the engineer, we just hadn't heard guitar like that.
And with the pop sensibilities along with it.
Yes, good songs.
And I think that's the combination that makes that album so approachable to so many different people.
The start of the album is epic. And then that runs into Running with the Devil, which I think is probably my favorite track on the whole thing. And then Eruption, which you just talked about, segueing into a great cover, and they made that song their own, You Really Got Me by the Kinks.
That is a really cool transition between the two tracks too. Going into You Really Got Me from that, because then you got that riff, that iconic riff.
And then going into Ain't Talking About Love,
which is probably my favorite song on the album. It's
probably the hardest song on the thing, really. Maybe not instrumentally, but, the attitude of it.
It just has such a cool sound. The guitar has such a cool sound at that beginning riff. That's actually, I think that's my favorite song on the album.
And you mentioned the attitude. It's, it's a heavy rock album, but it's fun. It's a party album. It's just every song kind of gets you in a good mood.
And actually, I think that's where the backing vocals really play a huge part in it, because they add that pop sense to it.
Right. Michael
And
Anthony, the
Michael
bassist.
Anthony,
Yeah,
he's
the high
singing
harmony.
way up there high. Yeah. And it really does change. It just changes the feel of a lot of those songs. But then you get that dynamic between David Lee Roth, with more of some of the songs more like heavy and down, and some of them just that scream, that ow, and then you've got that very melodic backing vocal. It's just a really cool dynamic between the two.
Yeah. Plus they kind of pay homage to punk in it with Atomic Punk.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Indeed. David Lee Roth, you got this classic frontman archetype, not a talented vocalist per se, but just the perfect match for the music. And his voice and Michael Anthony's high harmonies blend well. He was the lyric writer for most of it. So that's his attitude coming through in the songs. And, I've never considered Van Halen to be Van Halen with any other lead vocalist than David Lee Roth. I know there's a lot of debate about that. Yeah, Sammy Hagar, he's got better pipes. Sure he does. Better range, stronger vocals. But plug Sammy Hagar onto any of those songs on the debut album. Are the songs as good? Hell no.
No. I like 5150, but it's not groundbreaking in any way. I think it's just because David Lee Roth is so unique too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Sammy's just not so much. It's not that he isn't good, but he doesn't have that dynamic personality that totally comes through in the music like David Lee Roth does. And actually, I was kind of surprised. I mean, I knew this, but when I went back and was kind of looking at their albums again, like 1984, which was huge, that was the last album David Lee Roth was on.
Right. Yeah.
But when you think of Van Halen, you do not think of Van Halen with Sammy Hagar. You don't think of Van Hagar.
I certainly
You think of Van Halen, with David Lee Roth. And Sammy Hagar did quite a few albums with them, but that's not what you remember.
And he did some worthy stuff outside of Van Halen.
Oh, yeah. In fact, when we get into the early 80s, I'm going to have at least one Sammy Hagar album probably is my fave.
Album? Really?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's surprising to me. But he was lead singer in Montrose before, and I think Montrose was a bit of an influence on Van Halen. And everybody looks at the tapping, on Eruption in particular, as groundbreaking. He didn't invent that. That had been done before. Eddie Van Halen picked that up. Harvey Mandel, Alan Holdsworth, plenty of other guitarists had experimented with the tapping technique. But you throw everything into the mix with Eddie. He's a great rhythm player, not just a lead gymnastic player, but a hell of a good rhythm player too, like Hendrix. Hendrix was an absolute cream of the crop rhythm guitar player as well as virtuoso lead player.
The thing about Eddie too, you can tell the joy that is just exuding from him when he's playing. And like you talked before about bands and musicians who love music and who are really into music. He's one of those guys that he just loves what he's doing and he loves music.
They came from a musical family. Their father was a band leader and obviously shows very gifted, talented musician, probably could have excelled in a number of...
He started as a drummer and Alex was started as a guitarist, and then they swapped because Alex kept playing Eddie's drums when he was gone. And so they were like, well, maybe we should switch. And they did.
No, I'm glad Mike chose Van Halen because they should definitely be represented on our playlist for the 1970s for sure. And Mike, you said your favorite track is Running with the Devil?
Yeah, that's probably my favorite track. Part of it is just because it being the first thing on the album, and that still sticks with me. The start of that album is... It
is one of the coolest starts of an album, I think.
Yeah. All of Van Halen's albums are good. I don't know that we're going to have representation until we get to 1984. There's going to be a song or two from 1984 on the playlist.
Well, 1984 is probably one of the biggest hits of that year, so...
Yeah. I may have Dance the Night Away next year. I don't know. I haven't started whittling down my list for 70. Cheryl, you're already diving into 1979. I'm just...
I love 1979. I'm going down a rabbit hole of 1979, and I need to stop because it's going way beyond just things that I would want to talk about on the podcast or things that anybody's even heard of or I've even heard of that I'm now discovering.
Well, I'm trying to listen to as many 78 albums as I can before we get through the year, although I'm not going to change my album pick. Although one album really struck me when I listened to it. It's one that I hadn't heard it before, by a group called Flash and the Pan, which was...
Yeah, I always was thinking it was Flash in the Pan, but it's Flash and the Pan.
I want to make sure I differentiate it from Sniff the Tears.
Tears.
It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Flash and the Pan, which was Vanda and Young, the producers behind AC/DC. They were in the Easy Beats, who had one of the great rock songs of the 1960s, band out of Australia, with Friday on My Mind.
Plus, they wrote Love is in the Air by John Paul Young in 78.
Yep, big hit in 78.
Oh, that was a big one.
Another
Yeah.
Aussie.
Yeah.
But it's one that I definitely am going to revisit after listening to it for the first time. Speaking of guitar heroes, a guy named Danny Gatton put out his second album in 1978. Still an unfamiliar name to a lot of folks. You know, guitar heads certainly know who Danny Gatton is. At one time, he was called the world's greatest unknown guitarist. And I remember being a kid and seeing a piece on the news about him. It was the first time I'd ever heard of him. And then his CDs started to show up when I was working in music stores in the late 80s and early 90s. Unfortunately, he passed away from suicide, dealt with depression. But he had signed a major label deal with Elektra before he ended his life. But, oh my God, incredible guitar player. Certainly worth checking it out if you have never heard of Danny Gatton. Some interesting debut albums that year. Dire Straits' first album came out in 1978. That was quite a sensation. Yet another outstanding guitar player in Mark Knopfler. And I think you really have to be more of a musician to really appreciate what he's doing with a guitar. Not as flashy, not
but
as over.
Sultans of Swing's still a huge song, that you hear all the time now.
Yep.
The Cars debut.
The Cars debut album, which Mike nearly picked as his. Cheap Tricks, Heaven Tonight. Well, of course, we already put California Man on the list, but before the year was out, the Ed Budokan album came out as well, which was their breakthrough after years and years of touring the Midwest in the United States. Brian Eno put out his Ambient One, Music for Airports, in 1978.
Yeah, this is when he lost me.
Oh, is that right?
I'm a fan of the rock pop Brian Eno. Yeah.
Peter Gabriel's second album.
Yes.
So all the Peter Gabriel albums didn't have titles, but a lot of people refer to them by the covers. So his first album is Car, with the car with the rain on it. Second album is Scratch, with that really cool cover effect where he's got his hand in a claw shape turned back toward himself, and it looks like he's scratching the film. It's a really, really cool effect. I didn't get through too much of that album, but it interested me. It's kind of abrasive, but interesting.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. The first 4 Gabriel albums are amazing. I didn't get into them until the 80s, so.
The Melt album, the third album, is the one I've by far listened to the most. And then probably
I've listened to Melt and Car the most.
Yeah. I've never listened to Car. I thought I
love
had
Car.
it. I thought I had it, and then I went and discovered I bought 2 copies of Scratch instead accidentally.
Well, then you better listen to Scratch, because you have 2 of them and you still haven't listened to it.
The Jam, All Mod Cons, for a lot of people, that's their favorite Jam album.
Devo's first album.
Right, yes.
The B-52's first album.
With Rock Lobster. The Kinks put out Misfits in 1970. Now, a lot of the Kinks albums in this era aren't great albums from start to finish, but I think all of them have at least 2 or 3 great songs. What else we got here? Oh, Little Feat, Waiting for Columbus. We referenced that when John Windus joined us a couple of episodes ago. Their great live album came out in 1978.
Kraftwerk, The Man Machine.
Yep.
They get much poppier.
Marvin Gaye released an album called Hear My Dear in 1978, which was a commercial flop. It was a critical flop, but it has been completely reassessed and is now considered one of his great works.
And I'd never heard of this album, but when you talked about it, when you did the Marvin Gaye song, I've actually noticed now that it pops up on a lot of the lists of the best albums from 1978.
Yeah.
It was never on my radar before. I'd never even heard of it.
And it was poorly reviewed at the time. I think a lot of people heard it and got, what is this guy's problem? This whole album, he's just railing about his ex-wife, and I can't believe I have to pay $1 million. But it's compelling. And of course, he's just such an amazing, gifted musical talent and singer. It's an experience.
You mentioned Live at Budokan, one of the greatest live albums.
Yes.
Another one of the greatest live albums ever came out that year. Thin Lizzy, Live and Dangerous.
Live and Dangerous, yes. Yes.
Awesome album.
Incredible live band.
And also, The Police had their debut that year.
Right. Lend Us to More. And we got Roxanne for that album on our playlist, courtesy of our friend Roy.
another punk band gone different in their second album, which came out in 1978, Wires, Chairs Missing. Yeah,
My favorite Wire album.
It's a fairly dramatic parting from their just straight ahead punk album, Pink Flag. And there's a song on it called Outdoor Miner, which is just a beautiful song. Yeah. And once again, lyrics that don't make a whole lot of sense.
I don't even know what they're saying, but I sing along to it.
Yeah, but it hits you, and it's a song that I have to listen to at least a couple times every year.
And that song is so poppy.
Right? They were still doing some punk on that album with Sand in My Joints.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And I Am the Fly.
I Am the Fly.
Yeah.
Post-punk. I'd call that post-punk.
Yeah. Really good album. Really good album. Some of the songs that didn't quite get there for me. I know we did this already with Cheryl, where she had a song that she wanted to pick, and we decided, it doesn't really fit on the playlist, a little too down. That's the case with this, although it's one of my favorites, and it's a very meaningful song to me, because I had an incredible concert experience where one of my favorite artists played this song on my request. The song's called I'm the Cosmos by Chris Bell, who was part of Big Star with Alex Chilton. And the single came out in 1978. Pretty obscure for a lot of people. I first heard it, I think, in a cover by the Posies, but it's just one of the great songs out of the whole power pop milieu, I guess. But it's just, it's too depressing for the playlist.
Yeah.
But a beautiful, beautiful work. Now, The Clash put out their second album this year, which had Sandy Pearlman of Blue Oyster Cult producing. So a little heavier, more cleaner production sound, which I liked. Safe European Home. Great, great song off that album.
Actually, one of my favorite Clash songs is on that album too. Stay Free.
Yep.
Which is a Mick Jones song.
Dust in the Wind by Kansas. Yep, I said it. I still have a soft spot for that song.
Well, Hold the Line by Toto.
Okay.
That's my roller skating rink song. Totally embedded in my memory at the skating rink.
Oh, I'm going to have multiple skating rink songs when we get to 79. Chuck Mangione, Feels So Good. This probably should have been on my list because at one time, this was probably my favorite song when I was a kid. Chuck Mangione later became a running joke on the Simpsons, right? But what a great instrumental. If you don't know the song, you'll certainly recognize the melody. Think of some funky guitar scratching.
If you were alive in the 70s, you know that song.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, of course, Herb Alpert had a big hit trumpet instrumental the following year with Rise. Another one that I liked at the time. That kind of music was doing pretty well at this time. Parliament, Flashlight. I mean, any number of Parliament songs from that era. I love So Lonely off the Police album, the second track on their debut album. Another song that I was pretty sure was going to be on my list, but I gave away a couple of selections to our guests, so it got pushed out of there. And that's by the Saints, who put out my album in 77. Their third record, actually their second and third records came out in 78. Save Me, which is a cover of Aretha Franklin. Really cool record. It's less punky. The horn section becomes more prominent. It didn't sell squat. And off the Talking Heads album, Take Me to the River, they just owned that Al Green song, made it their own, which is an incredible arrangement. Beautiful organ on that.
Because the Night, Patti Smith.
Yep.
Doing a Springsteen song.
And then a soft rock favorite of mine, one I would have heard on my KELA, my dad's station when I was a kid, by a guy named Randy Van Warmer, who came out of Colorado. It's called Just When I Needed You Most. Big one-hit wonder.
Yeah, I remember
singer-songwriter acoustic track. So those are some of the songs that didn't quite get there for me.
Kiss You All Over by Exile. Baby Come Back by Player.
Interesting, Cheryl. I didn't realize this. So, 1978 was dominated by disco and the Bee Gees and the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack first half of the year. And then the Grease soundtrack comes out in the summer. So the Bee Gees studio albums, Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, and the Grease soundtrack all on the same record label. And Baby Come Back by Player was also on the same record label, RSO. They were so dominant in the first half of that year that the number one spot on the Billboard Top 100 was an RSO record song straight through until the end of May when With a Little Luck by Paul McCartney and Wings
that is
got to number
incredible.
one.
I doubt that that's ever been topped.
Oh, no, not even close.
Yeah.
Not even close.
Also, Magnet and Steel by Walter Egan.
Yes. Heard that a
And
lot
one
on
song
KULA too.
that I was very close to picking, but I didn't. Hot Child in the City by Nick Gilder.
Running Wild and Looking Pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, all good songs. Didn't quite make it. So let's find out what did make it as Cheryl's album of the year.
Yeah, my album of the year, which I think is undeniably one of the greatest albums of all time.
Won't get an argument from me.
And it's Elvis Costello and the Attractions, this year's model. Elvis Costello's second album, first one, My Aim Is True, came out the year before in 77. And at the time, he was using a backup band called Clover that actually ended up becoming Huey Lewis and the News. Huey Lewis was in the band at the time, but he didn't record on that album. And when Elvis Costello was recording his first album, he was still working a desk job at Elizabeth Arden Cosmetics. So he'd go to work during the day, he'd call in sick, go record the album, a few days in the studio, and then go back to work and call in sick again. So this is actually his first album he recorded where he was not still holding his day job. My Aim Is True. It did well in the UK, and, they were touring a lot. And he then decided that he was going to put together his own band, which became The Attractions. Pete Thomas on drums, Bruce Thomas on bass, no relation between the two, and Steve Naive on keyboards. This is where we get into the classic Elvis Costello years where I think, and a lot of people do, that he put out his best music. And a lot of it is because the band that he assembled. Pete Thomas had been in Chili Willy and the Red Hot Peppers and recorded a couple albums with them, UK pub rock band. Bruce Thomas was in a few bands. Steve Naive actually had never been in a band. He was only 19, but he was a classically trained pianist. Very talented guys. And Elvis Costello on guitar. So they had been touring, really working the songs that came out on this year's model for about a year or so. So by the time they got into the studio, these songs were well rehearsed and they busted out the album in like 10 days or something. And they kept it a really live sound because they wanted that energy behind it from their live shows. You can go onto YouTube and watch, there's a couple live shows from that era, from 77, 78. And these guys are, they're just like all out there.
Yeah,
and Elvis Costello, this is really where, you really saw it on the cover of My Aim Is True with him with the Buddy Holly glasses, horn rim glasses, and the kind of like geeky stance and the suit and tie. And well, that carries over onto this year's model too. And that album cover actually is an homage to the movie Blow Up. And so you see him behind the camera and he's got that look going. That was something that set him apart too, because this ain't no Van Halen, this is not somebody where you're like, this guy is cool. No, he's like the antithesis of that. And I have to say, for me personally, what really speaks to me is the music. Now, Elvis Costello, he's an intelligent guy. His lyrics, going back to the Cars debut album, which Matt is not a big fan of, mainly because of the lyrics. Well, Elvis Costello is not coming from that same place as the Cars were back then.
No.
What initially grabs me, every song is so good.
Yeah.
Every song is great. There's hardly a song on here that I could take off the album. And amazingly, so the album came out in December of 77 in the UK, wasn't released until like May of 78 in the US. And between the two releases, they actually took off one of my favorite songs, I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea, and Night Rally, because they felt that they were too British in the lyrics, and replaced those songs with Radio Radio, which was not even on the album initially. It was just came out as a standalone single. Talking about Van Halen's first album and having one of the greatest first tracks on an album, I love the first song on this year's model. It's called No Action, and it starts out with Elvis just talking. I don't want to kiss you. I don't want to touch. And then the band comes in, just full force. I love the way this album starts. And it doesn't stop from there. It's just nonstop. Even though the song's called No Action, it's nonstop action.
Yeah, that's right. and that's about as loud as his guitar is on the whole album. That first chord on No Action, that really metallic, loud chord. They are an incredible instrumental combo, and it's interesting to me how the guitar and it's just one guitarist. It's just Elvis Costello is the least prominent instrument in the combo.
Yeah.
I mean, he's basically just playing straight rhythm most of the time. He says, I just play the changes. He's not a flashy guitar player. He's a good guitar player, but, the stars of the show are the other guys.
Yeah.
Pete Thomas is ridiculously good drummer.
Pete Thomas is a giant. I mean, he's an amazing drummer. Steve Naive, really, the keyboards are the main instrument. I mean, they're the most prominent, I would say. But Bruce Thomas on bass, I mean, definitely holds the line, but also cool flourishes too. And really, the thing I really like too with Elvis Costello is that his guitar, there are some songs where there's some pretty undeniably cool riffs.
Yeah.
But most of the time, they're just kind of interspersed in there, here and there. And that's what makes them so cool, because when they do pop up, there's the guitar again with this really cool little lick that just pops in there.
So, yeah, it's a 10 out of 10 album for sure. And, I ran down songs that didn't make my list, but I could have picked just about any song off of this album. And that's part of why I didn't. Is like, how do you choose one? Because they're all so great. I think historically, years ago when I made a mixtape, I pulled Lip Service off it. That might still be my favorite song on the album.
That's actually one of my least favorite songs on the album. I'm not to be honest.
It's probably the poppiest song on the album. Not as aggressive as a lot of the other songs on it. Kind of chiming, jangling type guitars that you would see emerge in a few years with REM and bands of that ilk in underground music. And then you mentioned I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea. You got some Caribbean rhythms on that, some ska rhythms. And this is before the whole two-tone explosion, which was 79. Yeah. We'll talk about that quite a bit when we get to 1979. But Elvis Costello was right in the heart of that whole movement as a producer of the specials. So versatile band, ability to play in a number of different styles. You mentioned Steve Naive and the keyboards. It's a retro sound that he's getting. It's not a lot of modern synthesized. The Farfisa organ, which is a throwback to the garage bands of the mid-'60s. You can hear a lot of that influence.
This album is a total throwback to that. Yeah. In fact, they say they were really influenced by the Who, like early Who, like Can't Explain, and early Stones.
Well, you've got the cover referencing Blow Up. That's 1966. Yeah. So they're really kind of getting into that era and a lot of the sounds of that era in this music. Although at the time, this was cutting edge, new wave. He was perceived as coming out of the punk movement in America.
Right.
Less about the music, more about his attitude and his visual presentation, kind of a little provocative, a little in your face. I mean, kind of this angry young man image.
What I think more is an angry, frustrated man.
Yeah. Certainly romantically frustrated.
Yes. And that's what comes across lyrically and musically in this album. Every song, I mean, even the ones that aren't as upbeat or in your face, there's a tension there. It's undeniable. And it's definitely clear in the lyrics, but it's fully realized in the music too. And I think that that's what really is one of those things that makes this album, and it makes it such a cohesive album and a statement as well, is that exactly, I mean, even though he's pretty straightforward in the lyrics, but even if you were unsure about it, just by the music too, that there's a lot of tense frustration and built up there that needs to come out.
The song that is probably resonates the most with younger generations and that's carried on through the years would be Pump It Up, which you're pretty likely to hear played in a stadium setting at a sporting event. It's one of those...
You can't help but pogo to that song. I mean, And it's
kind of his version of... Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues with the torrents of lyrics, in which, Bob Dylan's song was inspired by Chuck Berry's Too Much Monkey Business. This is Elvis's take on that, like REM with End of the World as We Know It, same kind of song with the torrents of lyrics.
Elvis is one of the artists that has acknowledged there was something that came up in recent years with Olivia Rodrigo and her last single that was a huge hit for her that people were saying sounded like Pump It Up. And he came out right away and said, you know what? That's what rock and roll is.
Yeah,
rock and roll is taking. We all do it. I did it with Subterranean Homesick Blues. I did, he's like, that's exactly what everybody did, and of course, it's still happening.
It's not just rock and roll. Jazz has been doing it for years.
Yep, Elvis Costello fits that mold. People who are just obsessive music lovers. Elvis, very much one of those types, very knowledgeable about music and music history, and is influenced by music from many different genres.
Eras.
And Mike, you're a big Elvis fan. Where does this album rank for you in his pantheon?
Well, Elvis is one of those artists like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, that there's not one album that is my favorite. And at any given time, it may be this album or maybe that album. His first four are amazing. Then the next few are great. There was a time where King of America was my favorite Elvis album. And
one of my favorites too. Yeah.
But it isn't anymore, but it was at one time. And I love it, but that's the way it is with these great artists, is that each album has its own life and it resonates with you differently at different parts.
Yeah. And actually, I hold Elvis Costello up there as far as a songwriter, musician, and just because he has the whole package of the music and the lyrics.
I would say,
and the band.
As a songwriter, I think he is one of the two most preeminent songwriters to emerge since the breakup of the Beatles. I would say Elvis Costello and Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, I think so too. And actually, I have to give props also to the producer of this album, Nick Lowe.
Yeah.
Another great artist, came up through that UK pub scene, was on Stiff Records alongside Elvis Costello. Also put out a great album that year that we didn't mention, Jesus of Cool, titled Pure Pop for Now People in America. Great album. And he had a string of excellent albums as well.
Yeah. He produced the first few Elvis albums, also produced the first Damned album.
Yep.
Did some great work at the console. Well, we mentioned romantic frustration, a big part of Elvis's lyrical content, not only on this album, but a lot of his songs. Certainly that gets at the heart of my album, which is the first studio album by a band called Buzzcocks. They came out of Manchester. The first iteration of the Buzzcocks released an EP in early 1977, self-released an EP, 4-song EP, and this is during a time when nobody was really doing this kind of thing. Nowadays, we think of punk rock as do-it-yourself, DIY, and all these bands self-financing, putting out their own records and 7 inches and whatnot. Back then, there really wasn't that kind of apparatus. That was very unusual. The Saints, who had my album of 77, they self-released their first single, I'm Stranded, on Fatal Records and sent that out to music reviewers and radio stations and whatnot. So they were one of the first to do that. Television also, I don't know you would consider it self-released, but it was on a very, very small label they put their first single out on. So the Buzzcocks, starting out, it was Howard Devoto, real name Howard Trafford, on lead vocals, didn't play an instrument. Pete Shelley was the guitarist, real name Peter McNeish. The bass player was Steve Diggle, and the drummer, John Marr. So shortly after the release of this EP in February of 77, Devoto leaves the group. He decides punk music is over with. I don't want to be associated with this anymore. We're moving
on to post-punk now.
Well, he went on to want to do something a little more musically sophisticated, and he certainly did that with a band called Magazine, which also put out a phenomenal record at 78, one of my favorites. Buzzcocks goes on. They thought about, do we get another lead singer in here? But then Pete Shelley decided, no, I can do it, but we're going to need help on the guitars. So Diggle switches from bass to guitar, giving them a 2-guitar front line. They bring in a bassist, guy named Garth, who lasted for one single, and then they had issues with him, kicked him out of the band, and got a really good bass player in named Steve Garvey, no relation to the hairy-armed first baseman and philanderer of the LA Dodgers. Mike's giggling. Cheryl's like, what the hell is he talking about?
I know who Steve Garvey is.
But John Marr remains behind the drum kit. And again, like Pete Thomas, essential to this group. Fabulous drummer, young guy. So the first single they put out after Devoto's departure was Orgasm Addict, which caused certainly a stir in England with the lyrical content. And Howard Devoto was involved in the composition of that song and a couple songs that made it onto their first album as well. The second single, maybe the prototypical Buzzcocks song, What Do I Get? Forced at gunpoint to choose a Buzzcocks song, probably the one I would choose. Again, didn't make my playlist for 78 because I gave away a couple of my choices, but that was certainly in the running. And jaw-dropping moment years later when I saw that used on a TV commercial.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you don't really get surprised to hear cool music used in TV commercials because just the way things have changed in the music business and radio, it's often the most effective way to get your music heard these days. So there isn't the stigma about being a sellout that there used to be back in the 60s and 70s about commercially appropriating the music. But
or 80s and 90s. Yeah, that was shocking. I remember being shocked by that too.
Yeah.
Unexpected. Yeah.
I wasn't disappointed. I just think, oh, well, that's
no
unexpected. Cool. So I first heard Buzzcocks on the Singles Going Steady album as a sophomore in college.
Probably the best compilation album ever.
Yeah, definitely
created.
one of them. Definitely one of them. I don't think when I first heard it, I wasn't quite ready at that point, 19, 20 years old, for the punk vocals. I still was kind of holding on to this idea you had to have a more pleasant singing voice. I soon got over that. Pete Shelley's got one of those distinctive high-pitched voices. It really suits his songs, which are mainly about romantic frustration. A lot of songs about unrequited love. And two things kind of set them apart. A, they're a punk band. They're definitely a punk band. You know, we said Elvis Costello's guitar, not the most prominent instrument in the attractions. The guitar is very, very prominent in the Buzzcocks. It's not a lot of flashy soloing. In fact, when they do solo, it is about as rudimentary as can be. It sounds like a little kid playing a guitar solo.
Yeah.
But man, when they're hitting those power chords in unison, it carries a wallop. Certainly with John Marr all over the skins with his incredible speedy rolls and fills. So they're a punk band, but they're not railing about society or the government. They're writing love songs. And not too many other people playing this type of music were singing about that kind of stuff. Shelley was a brilliant lyricist. So is Devoto. Devoto had more of an edge to his lyrics than Pete Shelley. And some of them really pushed the envelope for 77 and 78. Certainly Orgasmatic. Everything about that song. And the picture sleeve of the single, very provocative as well. And then those Devoto songs that did make it onto their first album, which is called Another Music in a Different Kitchen. I got it as part of this incredible box set when we were working at Silver Platters. It's just called
probably
Product.
One of the first really cool box sets that came out too.
Yeah, and it's a throwback to so when this album initially came out, first earliest pressings, it was encased in a plastic bag that just said Product on the front. It's kind of their ironic nod to the commercial aspects of the music business. One of the many, many cool things about Buzzcocks is the imagery, the visual imagery on their 45 picture sleeves and their albums. A guy named Malcolm Garrett did a lot of the artwork, and another gal named who just goes by Linder. Very cutting edge modern designs on a lot of these.
Which is something that's really a lost art, especially in the late 70s, like early 80s, when punk started moving into new wave. Such cool album covers and the 12-inch singles. That was a really big thing with all the New Order singles, how cool they were. Like the art part of that is sort of lost now because people aren't buying singles.
Well, you mentioned Singles Going Steady. Such an incredible album because it was very basic in its format. It compiled A-sides on one side of the album in chronological order, and then the B-side of the album was the B-sides of all the singles in chronological order. And it still flowed beautifully.
And honestly, some of the B-sides are my favorite songs.
Oh, yeah. Why Can't I Touch It? That might make my playlist for 1979.
Love that song.
It's just one incredible song after another. Only one of those singles is actually on the LP, Another Music in a Different Kitchen. That's I Don't Mind, which is one of their great singles for sure. And revisiting this album, I just loved it so much at the time. And when I say at the time, I don't mean 1978. I mean early 20s, primarily, when I got into this stuff heavily. And they released 3 albums, all of them great. And the incredible run of singles compiled and Singles Going Steady. Then they went silent for nearly 10 years. They reformed in 89 to do a little tour of the United States. They put out an EP, and I remember getting that at Soundwaves Music in Burien. Still have my EP in the thin jewel case with a blue Soundwave sticker on it. A lot of really cool music store. Used to be down there in Burien. And then I missed them on that first Reformation, but they toured again not long after in the early 90s. And Cheryl, you and I had the opportunity to take a little road trip from Seattle down to Portland and saw them at Melody Ballroom, which was really cool. I don't think John Marr was drumming at this point. They had a new drummer in there. He left them.
I think that show was the only time I've ever slam danced.
So they've got new members of the band. They've got new compositions. But thankfully, because this was what I wanted as a fan, it was the hits, the songs you love, the songs you remember, all the Singles Going Steady stuff. And they were great live. They were not as tight live contemporarily back in the 70s. So a lot of credit goes to producer Martin Rushent on these albums because they are tight on the. I mean, everything is airtight. Great rhythm section. The guitars are so powerful. They sound great. And what struck me listening to this album again, I'd say the two songs that I figured I liked the least on the album really jumped out at me as great. 16, which is kind of a psychedelic sounding album. And these guys really started getting into acid in the later 70s, turn of the 80s, and the psychedelic influence creeping in. And then I Need, which is the second to last track. Much better songs than I recall. And we mentioned Pump It Up, a song that could be played in stadiums. I could take a couple of songs off of this, Autonomy and Moving Away from the Pulse Beat. I could easily use those introducing the starting lineup at a basketball game and hype up a crowd with those tracks. Or Pump It Up, or even off the Magazine album. The Light Pours Out of Me. That is just a killer.
I love that song.
Killer start to that song.
And that is a driving song.
And
hey, if they could play these on commercials, then why not? You might as well start playing them in stadiums.
Sure. And I think, again, that Magazine album, whole different kettle of fish because it's like prog influence. It's much more sophisticated music. Magazine was Devoto with John McGeough on guitar, who would later join Susie and the Banshees. Barry Adamson, amazing bass player who's got an incredible resume, has played with the Bad Seeds for many, many years, done really cool solo work as well. The keyboardist, Dave Formula, I love what he does with the key. And unlike Steve Naive on this year's model, Formula is using all kinds of different keyboard sounds, organ, all sorts of different synth patches.
It's pretty out there. And I think it's a little jarring to me because it feels somewhat out of place. But I might have to go back and listen to it a little deeper and kind of get over the initial sort of shock sometimes of how it just seems so odd.
Magazine's a really cool band. And dark, lyrically, sinister sounding, a lot of their music, but they could turn on a dime and get very poppy. The second track on that album, My Tulpa, very catchy song. And with a different lead singer, I could have seen Magazine getting some radio airplay in America and maybe selling a few more records. I wouldn't change it for a second because Howard Devoto is a very compelling frontman and I love his lyrics, but I don't think America was quite ready for him or them. Although a lot of the music on that is very sophisticated, could easily have been played on American radio, I think, in a kind of a different arrangement. But then getting back to Buzzcocks, it's just like the Elvis Costello album. Every song on here is a killer. Great sound. Love the lyrics. Both Devoto's and Shelley's lyrics. The song most people, I think, love the most for Buzzcocks was the second record they put out in 78, Love Bites. Not as good an album as Another Music in a Different Kitchen, but you got some classics on there too. Ever Fallen in Love with Someone You Shouldn't Have. That was their biggest hit in Great Britain.
That's the song. If anyone knows, they would know that song.
Right. And again, a lot of these songs, Romantic Frustration, Unrequited Love. And the other thing I was going to say that set them apart, punk band, pop hooks, lyrics of love songs, but ambiguity in the lyrical content to where it could be a traditional male-female situation, could be a male-male situation, could be a female-female situation. Pete Shelley was a bisexual man. Howard Devoto, not entirely sure where he lies on the sexual spectrum. I'm thinking probably not hard hetero, probably a little fluid. I don't know that for sure, so I'm not going to make any claims on that. But it's kind of a different thing that he did here where it's ambiguous. And so a lot of, everybody can relate to it because everybody's dealt with this kind of, and certainly me as a young 20-year-old was dealing with plenty of it. And going to that Buzzcocks show, it's like, oh my God, this guy is singing my life story song after song, But this band meant a lot to me then. And this album still resonates with me as a 50-plus-year-old, even though I've been happily married for 20-plus years now.
And Pete Shelley had a minor hit with Homo Sapiens in 1981.
Yeah, a lot of that was going to be the fourth Buzzcocks record. He did a lot of the demos on keyboards and synthesizers, and he had a long-running interest in electronic music. He was really into the German bands like Can and Neu and Kraftwerk, and a lot of that influence, like Moving Away from the Pulse Beat, the last track on here, very much out of that German Komische school. But so he did those demos. I think he decided that, I kind of want to go in this electronic direction now. And then Buzzcocks broke up or went on hiatus, I guess you'd say, for 8 years. But there's a
And
lot of cool stuff on that album.
That's a cool album. Yeah.
And again, very frank with the title track, Homo Sapien, clearly about a homosexual experience. Not subtle. Pretty
No,
cutting
it was banned in the UK, actually.
Yeah. Pretty cutting edge for the time that came out, as was a lot of that music. It's pretty early on in electronic and techno pop kind of music.
Which a lot more of that is going to pop up in 79 too, for me. I'm really debating, and I'm hoping Mike's going to come through for me with his album pick that would have been mine too, so that I can choose something else that's on that electronic synth vein.
Well, speaking of Mike is going to put a cherry on our Sunday and put the last song on our playlist for 1978.
And it couldn't be any farther away from Van Halen
or
than
Buzzcocks.
pretty much anything or Buzzcocks that I can think of.
Yeah, songs that I really liked at that time. I'm going to name two of them that I really enjoyed at that time. One of them was Boston's Don't Look Back, which, was kind of in the vein of the ultimate party song type of thing that Van Halen had. It just is a cool track.
Yep.
And then Jean-Michel Jarre's Equinox Part 4 from Equinox was, I thought, really cool.
I love that. Slap on a pair of headphones. That's how you have to listen to that. and that was one of those CDs that sounded amazing.
Yeah,
on CD.
But this was, back before CDs were out.
So you were listening to that in 1978?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, on the radio. It was something that was played on the radio every so often.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But the song that resonates most for me from 1978 is a cover song. It is a Jimmy Webb composition, which was first done by Richard Harris in 1968. But I think that the best version of the song, and it was a big hit in 78, was Donna Summer's MacArthur Park. There's a few different versions, actually, from 78. There's a single version. There's the 12-inch. There's the sweet version, which is 17 minutes long and adds other stuff to it. But a great song. I don't know if there's much more to say. I think most people know the song, and it borders on being silly and syrupy at times, but it certainly is, I think, a really fun song, especially back then.
I think the one way people know that song is it's a song about leaving the cake out in the rain.
Someone left the cake out in the rain.
Because there's really no other song that talks about leaving a cake out in the rain.
Yeah.
I don't think that I can take it because it took so long to bake it, and I'll never have that recipe again.
Yep.
and then we're off and running. No, it's a huge production on that song.
Yeah. That and just the singing and the style of it. Donna Summer was amazing at being able to be stylish and sexy at the same time, and not overtly. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
But,
we discussed her quite a bit when we added I Feel Love to the playlist. She's coming from a pretty devoutly religious background, but also a theater background, a musical theater background. So basically, I think she felt a little ill at ease being put into this sex pot role with, certainly starting with Love to Love You Baby, which is basically sex on vinyl.
Yes.
Talk about orgasm addict.
Right, exactly. But she, she had the right mentality. It's like she's inhabiting a role. She's acting.
Yeah, I mean, the song's from Bad Girls, and, she's on the cover as a streetwalker, but she rose above that in a very stylish way, and she used it in a very powerful way, but in the right way.
I think, like Matt said, she was playing a role, and that was all part of the whole package.
Yeah.
And really, MacArthur Park, I mean, it's one of the most dramatic pop songs.
Yeah.
And in her rendition...
Just the song itself.
Just the song itself. Yeah.
Then you add her rendition and that production, which is
and
over
it
the
just
top.
Builds it up even more over the top. And it already, I mean, Richard Harris was the one that had the first hit with that song. And he came from the theater. Several people have had hits with this song.
Andy Williams. Andy Williams' version is, if you haven't gone and listened to it, you need to listen to it in stereo.
The
But
phasing.
it is amazing.
His version is probably the most entertaining.
All right. Well, now I've never heard this, so I'm going to have to. I do have a bit of a soft spot for Andy Williams. I think we talked about that on the Christmas episode.
He has. I love the Andy
Some
Williams
of his productions
album.
are really. I mean, he had great studio musicians working with him a lot of the time, and I think he's an underappreciated vocalist. I really love his voice. Yeah. And Donna Summer, I think, is an underappreciated vocalist. Unfortunately, she passed away several years ago, but people forget how big she was. So she was this massive, massive star.
That went on through into the 80s.
Right.
I mean, she had big hits for several years after that.
Even in the early video era with She Works Hard for the Money. That was a big hit song for her too. Kind of the end of the line. But
and I think a song like MacArthur Park, it needs a big voice. And Donna Summer definitely could provide that.
Huge pipes, great vocal talent. And did you know, trivia here, I remember this distinctly, she had the record for the longest held note, I think, on a pop song on MacArthur Park until Air Supply broke the record with All Out of Love, the final note on All Out of Love in whenever that came out, 81, 82.
I'm going to have to go back and listen to that because I don't remember that final note.
That's one of my favorite Air Supply songs, too.
I like it.
Certainly, MacArthur Park will fit in well on our playlist, which already has plenty of disco classics on it. So there you have it, folks. The final song for 1978, courtesy of Mike Bott, and that is Donna Summer's rendition of Jimmy Webb's MacArthur Park. Don't know that I'm going to put the 17-minute version on the playlist, but looking forward to re-racking the playlist and hearing Donna Summer on there. And that closes out 1978. And like I said, for me, closes out chapter 1 of this journey. 1979, going to be very fun picking songs from that year because I'll go back to memories of listening to KB 101 on the old clock radio and hearing the hits of the day from that time period. And the first song I ever bought on a 45 record, I think came out at the end of 1979. Might have been beginning of 80. I'm going to have to double check on that. The album that I thought was a slam dunk, going to be my album pick for 1978, ended up getting passed by several others. That was Blondie's Parallel Lines, but the big hit off of that, released as a single in 1979, one of the biggest hits of the year. That's going to be one of the first songs we talk about when we delve into that year. Before we do that, though, our next episode, and we're going to have a couple of episodes like this before we close out the 70s. We want to pay tribute to a couple of the quintessential artists of the 1970s who didn't have songs that made our playlist. I know for both artists, it was close call, but we're going to give them a show of their own for both these artists. And we're going to start with Steely Dan the next time we reconvene. Looking forward to that.
I think we'll have a lot to say about Steely Dan.
Yes.
And I think it'll be fun to get the male-female perspective on that band.
Right. Another one of those bands that tends to be primarily male fans. But Cheryl breaks the mold, if you haven't noticed that already, in a lot of ways. So we'll give her take on the Steely Dan catalog. We'll pick our favorite Steely Dan albums, and we'll pick our top 5 favorite Steely Dan songs as we review their 70s album. Pretty much their core catalog, all released in the 70s. Gaucho came out in 1980 before they went on hiatus. But we'll review the albums of Steely Dan. And before too long, we're going to do a show on Elton John as well, who was maybe I believe he was the top singles artist of the decade of the 70s. And again, none of his songs has made our playlist, although a couple came very close for me. But those were the earliest years when we were only picking a song or two. So it was tough to crack the list.
We don't want to leave the 70s without talking about Elton John.
Absolutely have to talk about Elton John before we get out of the 70s. So that is coming up. But until then, thank you for joining us for another episode of Matt and Cheryl's Gen Excellent Playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Cheryl.
And we'll talk to you next time, folks.